The Stormspeeder Thunderstrike is the final variation of the Stormspeeder model, equipped with the heaviest weapons available to help it hunt tanks and enemy monsters. It is of course fast and heavily armored, as all the Stormspeeders are. Hello everybody, my name is Spoons Rattling, and today we are covering the final of the Stormspeeders. The Stormspeeder Thunderstrike, equipped with some of the best weapons available to this chassis, as well as one of the best rules for these chassis. The Stormspeeder Thunderstrike is the priciest, though, at 150 points, for a fairly standard, if nothing special, stat line of the Stormspeeders at movement 14 inches, toughness 9, a 3+ save, 11 wounds, leadership 6+, and OC3. For this points cost, it is not tough in the slightest, like its little brothers, though granted for its special rule, I think that's fair. In terms of ranged weapons, the Storm Fury Missile is one attack that hits on 3s at 48-inch range with strength 12, AP3, and damage d6+1, so effectively a las cannon. And the Thunderstrike Las Talon is 2 attacks that hit on 3s at 36-inch range with strength 9, AP3, and damage d6+1, so a less powerful las cannon. The Twin Icarus Rocket Pod is anti-fly 2+, and twin linked at ballistic skill 3+, with D3 attacks that hit on 3s at 24-inch range with strength 4, AP1, and damage 2. Good for dealing with Space Marines. The melee weapon is simply Armored Hull, which is 4 attacks that hit on 4s at strength 4, AP0, damage 1. That's a lot of 4s, and it is also very bad in melee. Not only for the cost, but just in general. This thing doesn't want to be in melee at all, if you couldn't tell. In terms of core abilities, it has Deadly Demise D3, so a small explosion to worry about. And it has Deep Strike if you wish for it to come in on the enemy flanks, though given its immense footprint, this may be slightly difficult to do. Thunderstrike is its special rule. After this model has made its attacks, select one enemy monster or vehicle hit by those attacks. Each time a friendly Astartes model makes a ranged attack against that unit, add 1 to the wound roll. This is of course catastrophically powerful for a lot of weapons against the biggest enemy target that will very quickly fold under these circumstances, though of course you pay no small price for it at this 150 point very fragile model, though even just getting 1 turn out of this could allow for a huge positive points trade of ensuring that this thing hits something that then goes on to be blown up by something significantly cheaper, whether that target be something like an Imperial Knight or a Imperial Guard, Bane Blade, or Rogal Dorn. Moving on to buff options, Tech Marines can of course give +1 to hit, and healing is very good, but of course I would not say it's super consistent unless you're just keeping it hanging back, firing off its buffs. But that isn't what I would generally use, though I don't think it is awful, and I think that denying its great range and speed is doing it a great disservice. And then of course itself is a buffing option for dealing with, again, the toughest stuff in the game, so giant knights, etc. It excels with anything that has twin linked, and las cannons also really appreciate it. It can make even things like humble bolters threat to medium monsters, and plasma will be a full force anti-tank weapon. Of course, this thing's very pricey, but I'd say this buff is something that your enemy would seriously have to worry about. In terms of detachment options, there's of course Gladius, which is of course very good for the advance and shoot. Firestorm can give it extra strength, which is nice on the Las Talon. And once again, advance and shoot, very nice on something this fast. Stormlance, this gives it an okay target for ride hard and ride fast, though of course doesn't want to be in melee, so it would need some form of advance and shoot. Ravenwing, again, it likes advance and shoot, and rapid reappraisal does offer the ability for it to redeploy, though at this point's cost I wouldn't say it's quite as standout as it is on something like the Stormspeeder Hail Strike. Iron Storm, the big las cannon, of course, or the big missile, really likes the reroll, and giving tanks like Reaper +1 to wound can be extremely nasty, so I would say it's right at home in Iron Storm. And then, of course, for the rest of the detachments, it offers general useful objective grabbing abilities, and its buff can be very useful for just about any formation, supposing it at least has a decent contingent of fire support, which most Space Marine forces tend to bring along with them given their whole balanced approach to making war. Though if you are running a mainly melee thing, whether that be in like Liberator Assault Group, it definitely loses some of its luster. In terms of Crusade rules to cover, in terms of Space Marines, of course, Resilient Machine Spirit is really the only useful thing for it, as it gives it +2 wounds, and the rest are both melee buffs. In terms of weapon modifications, buffing up the Las Talon is a very good idea, with either extra damage, and then buffing up its Sky Strike missiles with a +1 attack would also be super useful, and would make this thing significantly more damaging. In terms of Tyrannic War, Blessed Hole gives it a great extra toughness with a 5+ invuln, Auto repair nodes, of course, heals it every turn, and reinforced superstructure is super useful against things like standard plasma, Custodes melee, and heavy bolters. Elite Crew also gives it nice extra accuracy, and in Pariah Nexus, Hardened Defenses is very useful for a vehicle like this, as it gives it that feel no pain, and Tank Hunter is generally useful and will help it excel against its intended targets, while also making it very, very effective against things like light vehicles that it will maul quite effectively with those reroll 1s, when it will be wounding most of them on 3s. Of course, we do all have to move on to the competition, because for at this points cost you can get quite a lot, and one of those things you can get is the Gladiator Lancer. If you just need direct anti-tank, it's hard to beat the Lancer, because it offers a even bigger laser destroyer that has longer range and even more damage. And then, of course, I did also want to shout out the Predator Annihilator, because it is similar to the Lancer, though more of a discount version. Its damage isn't quite as apocalyptic, though it is cheaper this unit and offers better anti-tank damage on its own. And then if you are running something like a Crusade or a narrative campaign or game, the Legends Deimos Predator offers excellent anti-tank firepower at close range on a much cheaper chassis, clocking in at only 115 points. Of course, though, this isn't exactly the same role, it's more so just an alternative version of it, as it can't get something like a top-mounted las cannon to really go all in on long-range anti-tank firepower. Its best anti-tank weapon, of course, being the Melta Destroyer, which is very close range. That of course, is for the Deimos Predator video when we get to that. In terms of any other competitors, honestly, I think the Stormspeeder Hailstrike gives it a solid run for its money with another good buff if you're more worried about infantry. But these are definitely the two main ones in the same price bracket. I would mention things like Land Raiders or Repulsors, but they cost so much more in points that I don't think it's really even fair to compare the two in the same bracket. Moving on to the best use for this thing, I believe it is the best of the three. I think that its buff is just powerful enough that it has a place in most armies, because a lot of enemies you'll be facing will have some form of vehicle, whether that be a big transport or just a big shooty vehicle that really needs to go down quickly. And this thing gives it a very, very competent way of doing that through its humongous buff for whatever your army's shooting at. And some armies, like Knights, for example, will be weeping should they see this on the other side of the table, because it means that Oath of Moment, which is already extremely effective against them, will have a partner in crime with the +1 to wound, which can mean that they have to delegate a lot of firepower to destroy this thing, whether they want to risk getting something like a +1 to wound on one of their most important Knights, which would then, of course, get blown up by just about everything that focuses fire at it, thanks to the +1 to wound, which makes everything significantly more effective against them, especially the likes of las cannons and plasma guns. Anyways, that brings us to the end of our three-part review on the Storm Speeders. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly didn't, really. These units are all so extremely similar that it became slightly mind-numbing to talk about. Hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe.